Hey everybody. So in this video, I'm going to be encouraging anyone who is thinking about going into psychology to as a university education path to think again. In a way, I'm kind of speaking to myself many years ago. So I did my undergraduate degree in psychology. I did very well. I went on to a PhD program thereafter in the US. I left the program fairly soon into getting into it. I had been doing very well in the program up until when I left, but I realized that while I respect science and so forth, um, I found doing it tedious. But even more important than that was I learned how poor the job market was. And sometime after leaving, I had just wished that I had come across something like what I'm about to record right now, um, which is warning me to really look into what I'm doing and to not assume that what I'm doing is a good path to get onto. I think it's very easy to overestimate the value of a university degree because for so long, we are all told that when you're in high school and before that, the best thing you can do is go to university. A university education is so valuable. And so you get there and you see, all the big fancy buildings, professors who went to McGill and Harvard and NYU and big fancy schools, and it's really easy to kind of get caught up in that and just feel like I'm doing the best thing I can be doing for myself. This is so ambitious. The world is my oyster because everyone, told you that it would be. Um, but a university degree, as many of us are learning and have learned, is not inherently a good idea. There are no assurance that good things are coming, and I'm going to argue that psychology is often a very poor choice as a field to study. The first thing I'm going to say though is don't just take my word for it. Do your own research. I said that I'm kind of making this video for people that were in the position that I was in years ago. But had I come across this video, there's a good chance I would have written it off as being uninformed, and I would have been wrong, but I would have thought that. And so the first thing I'm going to do is say, do your own research, and not through the psychology department website. There's a conflict of interest there, so you shouldn't take their word for what they're telling you about the value of the degree they want you to sign up for. You look at unbiased, impartial sources, for example, government, labor statistics, research agencies, and so forth, and look at what the actual real job market is like for fields that you might be able to get into from psychology. Um, so do that. But what I'm going to argue in this video is that at pretty much every level of psych education, you should think twice about going into it because there's a really good chance that it's not a good idea. So let's start off with the bachelor's level. I'm going to argue that getting a bachelor's degree in psychology there's a good chance it's not a good idea for you. So let's look at some of the reasons. The first I'm going to argue is that you will pick up very little in the way of marketable skills. You will not learn how to create anything. You will not learn how to fix anything. You will not learn how to create anything of any economic value, um, really. Um, and what skill, you will hear that a psych degree will help you get more critical thinking skills. Um, Name a university faculty that cannot claim to help you get that. It doesn't matter what it is. Any program can make claims to helping its students develop critical thinking skills. Music students have to take classes in theory where they analyze, different aspects of sound and music and the historical context in which the music was created, the social context, and how different influences, converge to help give rise to new styles of music. There's critical thinking there. Um, Physical education, critical thinking about different types of fitness programs, different ways of gaining the interest of low motivation students to engage in physical and healthy activities. Different approaches and strategies to coaching. There's critical thinking there too. There's critical thinking in all the sciences, in all the social sciences. No faculty does not claim to help you develop your critical thinking skills. And even if psychology did have a unique claim to that, which it doesn't, but even if it did, it's the most popular degree on campus. So every year, a couple thousand new psych grads are being churned out by your university alone. So even if there was something unique about psychology, you're surrounded by thousands of people and supply and demand. Even if it was valuable, it's not valuable when everyone has that skill set. Air is incredibly valuable, but it's so plentiful that it's free, right? You can't sell air because it's everywhere. Um, Writing. What university student doesn't write? If you're an engineer, you do technical writing. If you're an English student, you do essays all the time. Philosophy, you do essays. Even in the sciences, you're doing technical writing. Even in music, you're doing theory papers. Everyone's writing. Um, Understanding human behavior. Psych has no special claim to this. So many faculties accurately tell you that they help you in better understanding human behavior. Political science, philosophy, economics, sociology, anthropology, English literature, all of these fields and others give different perspectives and different ways of looking at human behavior, human psychology, human feelings, and so forth. Um, and what's more, even if psych had a unique claim to studying human behavior, which it doesn't, but even if it did, it's not really going to help you very much in working with other people. You don't learn to ride a bike by reading about the physics and the neurophysiology of balance. You learn how to ride a bike by riding a bike and failing a bunch of times, but keep on trying and retrain your cerebellum to do it. With psychology and working with others, you get better at it by doing it and by getting feedback and then practicing again. You can learn things about human psychology and working with others by reading, but you don't need a psych degree to do that. You can buy books like how to, make friends and influence people, books on body language, books on different ways of approaching new people, and so forth. You can absolutely read these books, and you should. But ultimately speaking, you need to practice. Learn the concept, apply the concept, get feedback, do it again. You don't need a psych degree to do that. And in nowhere in your psych degree will you be given a forum to practice these skills. There is no applied psychology class where you practice. It's nothing but reading about this study and this other study with no application. You don't need the psych degree. Get a couple of books and go out and practice. Um, so those are some reasons why not to get an undergraduate degree in psychology. It offers little value. You don't learn how to do or create anything. And what you do learn how to do, you know, it's devalued by the fact that you have the most popular degree on campus. So many thousands of other people have the exact same skills. And those same skills are also being developed by, pretty much every other faculty in the university to some degree or other. So there's nothing you have that is special. Supply and demand. Just because something is valuable does not mean you're going to make money off it because it has to be somewhat scarce too. Air and water are incredibly valuable, but they're not scarce, so they're not expensive. People aren't paying arm and leg to get them. Um, so that's the bachelor's level of education. What about going on to grad school? Start off with research grad school. I'm going to argue against this too. Lots of reasons. First off, the job markets are terrible. If the major university in your city or any city, the University of Toronto, the University of Iowa, Harvard, Wayne State University, whatever, big and small, if any one of them creates a tenure track position in, say, developmental psychology or social psych or whatever tomorrow, they can depend on getting hundreds of applications, each one of them having at the bare minimum a PhD or, someone who's about to get their PhD. Oftentimes it's people with PhD plus a couple of postdocs, but there's only one spot. If they get 200 or 300 applications, about 299 of them are going to go away empty-handed. And if you are someone who's so brilliant and so talented that you actually get that one spot, you are so brilliant and talented that you could have probably been a doctor, made more money, had more status, had more job security, job mobility. Um, or you could have gone into something like, more modest, like physical therapy or occupational therapy. That's what I do now. And you would have made roughly similar money, but you would have worked way fewer years for way fewer hours. When you're on the job, you're working less hours. You've got more job mobility, more job security. In pretty much every way, most people are going to say that it's better. Um, because things are so poor on the job market in academia, that actually frees non-academic jobs to offer less too. If industry jobs wanted to get psych grads, but there were lots and lots of faculty positions offering good money, these industry jobs would have to compete by offering, good money and perks as well. But when 200 applications are received for a single spot, it frees the university to offer less money to tenured positions. And since most of the people are unsuccessful anyway, they're desperate to find jobs. So outside of the university, the people that would hire PhD psychologists can offer very little because there's nothing they're competing against. And what is more, there isn't much you can do with your degree anyway. Let's say you've studied let's spent the last few years studying how kids generalize their earliest verbs, or how, kids learn to relate with other kids, or how adults form opinions and so forth. Or how the perceptual cognitive systems develops, things like that. There's often very little that spending 8 years studying these things um, can get you outside of academia. And yeah, there are times when the things you've studied is relevant to other things. So, for example, studying how humans form opinions and attitudes, that's relevant to marketing and other things too. But the benefit you get from knowing those things is that it's rapidly diminishing returns. Like the first few months of your studying, you're getting the grand majority of the benefit right then and there. The rest of the time, you're just, pounding away on a very specific small question, and the results of your studies may even be, fail to invalidate the null hypothesis. You can get most of the benefit of knowing a specific area of psychology just by doing the first few months of reading, and everything thereafter is rapidly diminishing returns. Um, but yeah, there's very little you can do outside of academia in many areas of research psychology. And in cases where there are, as I just gave the example of, studying attitude formation, most of the benefit comes early on. There's other areas too. So, for example, using the skills you pick up in psych, in statistical analysis and software use, that can be used outside of your research area too, absolutely. But learning how to use statistical software by way of a 7 year, 6 year PhD, that's remarkably inefficient. Spending 10% of your year learning this software. You could have, if you wanted to be a statistical analyst, just spent a year or two really learning the software. You would have learned the software better and had years to spare. So even there, there are things you can do outside of the tenured academic roles, but the path you would have taken to get there through getting a PhD is remarkably inefficient. Um, you won't make much money. So, for example, a National Science Foundation 2006 study found that psych PhDs made about $75,000 a year on average. That doesn't sound like it's that bad, but consider what goes into that. That includes psych PhDs of all levels of experience. About 70% of the people that made up that study had been working for at least 11 years. It also includes clinical psych PhDs, industrial organizational, human factors, like areas with applications outside of research. It includes research psychologists with sort of like value added skills and, for example, computer modeling of cognition and so forth, computer programming. Um, you're not going to make that much money if you're someone studying developmental psych. You're surely not going to make that much money for quite a few years, too. And what's more, $75,000 isn't that much money. A first year occupational therapist will make that, and all it took them was a 4 year bachelor's degree, a 2 year master's. That's it. And during which time they didn't have to work as hard. And when they're on the job, they're working maybe not even 40 hours a week, maybe up in the high 30s. Compare that to the 60-hour weeks that a psych PhD is putting in for 7 years. It's not even close. Um, so yeah, so those are some reasons not to get a research PhD in psych. There's just not many tenure track positions. There's usually very little you can do outside of university positions. The money's not that good. You work extremely hard to get extremely little. Think about the opportunity cost. If you're someone who can get into a PhD program, you're a smart, hardworking person. You probably could have gotten into occupational therapy, physical therapy. Most more you could have gotten into a lot of people, not all, but some of them, a non-trivial minority could have gotten into med school or dentistry. There's so many other things you could have been doing. Now, what about clinical psychology? As I said with the statistic from the 2006 NSF study, the $75,000 one, that includes clinical psychologists, which is going to inflate the the numbers because there actually is a real application outside of research. There's something you can do if you're not researching that will provide value that people are going to pay you for. I still don't think you should go into clinical psychology, or at least maybe I should bring that back a bit. You should think twice about it. Clinical psychology, yes, it's an application, but look at what goes into getting one. For one thing, these programs are extremely hard to get into. The standards to get into a clinical psych PhD program, they're comparable to getting into med school. If you can get into a clinical psych program, there's a really good chance that you could have gotten into med school. Now, yes, you'll have to take some chemistry classes and so forth, but it just shows how talented you have to be. You're a really hardworking, really smart, really talented person to get into clinical psychology. Um, it's a lot of work. These programs are 6, 7 years, and more than half of that time, you're not even learning how to do treatment. It's research more than that. Now, if you actually want to be a research clinical psychologist, great. But if you just want to be a therapist, then more than half of your education is not even learning what you want to learn most. Now, what's more, let's look at the money. There's a lot of reason to expect that the money in clinical psychology has already gone down and will not be getting any better because a lot of, I work in healthcare now, I'm an occupational therapist, as I mentioned briefly earlier. There is a lot of economization happening in healthcare. We're seeing a lot of, over the last many years, the number of RN, registered nurse jobs, has gone down as LPNs or licensed practical nurses have been hired more to do the same work. They can't do everything an RN can do, but they can do a lot of it. And so a lot of RN positions have been quashed to hire LPNs because they can be paid, 25, 30% less an hour, roughly, maybe more than that. Same with GPs. General practitioners are often being replaced by nurse practitioners who make less money. Let's look at clinical psychologists. Clinical psychologists are not the only people who can provide clinical psychotherapy. There's several master's levels fields that offer clinical that psychotherapy. My own occupational therapy. Some occupational therapists give clinical therapy or psychotherapy. Social workers, counseling psychologists. In some settings, you'll even see theologically trained people with emphasis on mental health. So what happens is you have employers of psychotherapists as well as clients of psychotherapists economizing. They will often say, look, here's a clinical psychologist charging $120 an hour. Well, here's a social worker maybe charging 75 or 80 or whatever the numbers. I kind of just estimated those numbers. But what's going to happen is these clinical psychologists who have much more training, but although much of that training is not even relevant to therapy, are being undercut by people like me, by social workers, by counseling psychologists with master's degrees and so forth. That's going to make it harder for them to get work, and when they do get work, it's not going to pay as well. So that's a reason to think twice about going into clinical psychology. So basically, I've touched here several of the main levels and areas of education in psych and given reason why you should strongly think about not going into psych. I'm definitely not saying don't do it full stop. When it comes to research clinical psych programs, this is the way I view it. If you love psychology and you love psych research, which are not the same thing. Loving psychology and loving doing psych research are very different things. But if you love them and you really, really love them to the point where you could see yourself working 50, 65 hour, 70-hour weeks sometimes for 6, 8, 9 years straight, and then at the end of it all, not getting a tenure track position, not being able to get a job that in any way justifies the effort and investment you've made, the kind of job that if you knew you were going to get that at the end would have made you say, I'm not going to do this educational path. If you can make that kind of investment and at the end of the day not become a tenured prof and still feel like, you know what, I'm glad I did that because I love what I did, and I'm glad to have had the opportunity to spend that time studying that area and being in that community. If you love it that much, then by all means go and get the PhD in, developmental psych or whatever it happens to be. But if you don't, you're begging for a series of psychological breakdowns. Um, it's nothing to take lightly. Some people will say, things like, money isn't that important, and it's really easy to say that when you're 20. I said it, I thought it, and I think part of the reason why it's easy to underestimate how important money will be is because when you're young, your socioeconomic status and so forth doesn't have to do with your money as much. Because whatever money you have is more a product of your parents. Your socioeconomic status will have to do with things like your looks, your social skill in things people your age value, like sports and the arts and things like that. Um, but as you get older, money matters more. Like it has more to do with your status, and not just that, your security, your ability to feel like, you know. All right, continuing. So as you get older, money has more to do with your status, and not just your status. That's only one thing. And some people say, well, status doesn't matter. Well, it will matter later on when it influences your dating life, how you get along with people, who you get along with. But it's not just that. It's about your ability to do with what you want with your life, to be able to go on vacations, to be able to live where you want to live, and your ability to not have to deal with certain types of major anxiety, your ability to not have to worry about being able to pay your mortgage, to be able to pay for the things your kids need, to be able to feel like you can retire, to not feel this sense of angst that you will be able to depend on yourself. These things matter a lot. So again, I guess I'm not saying don't go into psychology, but don't go into it or anything else with your eyes closed. Know what you're getting into. Okay? Please let me know what you think. Give me your thoughts and your feedback. I'm sure this will resonate with some and create discord in others. Let me know what you think. Thanks a lot, and have a good one.